Like all authoritarians, Necroliberals too use highly emotionalizing and hence irrationalizing language to manipulate our thinking into baselessly trusting them, just on grounds of vibes, style, aesthetics, or identity, in absence of strong factual, logical, and rational arguments. It's a subtle distraction from real issues like how are the Dems were responsible for our ever-escalating impoverishment, deadly and destructive system. What solutions do third parties have? And it's precisely due to its subtleness that it's usually preferred over overtly authoritarian rhetorical practices I'll discuss in the next episode.
Welcome to Deconstructing Necroliberalism.
The appeal to emotion, be it fear or pity, is frequently used in politics, as I will show in a minute, but let's start with the ad hominem and emotionalizing appeal to the audience's sense of identity, which is also very common. As a black woman who grew up with a single mother, working hard to buy our first home in a middle-class neighborhood, I know very well how you feel right now. I know you deserve better, and we can do better, and on my watch we will do better. Although I was the second most powerful person on earth during the last 4 years, and you're still not doing better. Such an appeal to emotion connected to identity can be used in various degrees of overdness or covertness. It can be obviously exaggerating, or it can subtly sneak in emotive language. It can be just one word inserted, be it a word that attaches value or moral goodness to believing an argument, or be it a scare word, or it can be a lengthy, colorful storytelling. For example, when a politician is asked about how their policies will help combat inflation, and in response they promise that their economic plan will lead to prosperity, job creation, and a better future, because they know that hard-working families need some hope, then they paint a picture instead of answering the question about inflation-related policies. With regards to manipulation into non-voting third party, we can oftentimes find way more overtly emotional expressions. The economy is doing great, and we are working tirelessly for a ceasefire, while Trump and third-party voters will bring fascism, directly and definitely. Meanwhile, Democrats might not be the perfect choice, but this is not merely a drastic 90,990 steps making minimization of their own fascism, but also a straw man. No third-party voter claimed that. They actually said Dems are the opposite of perfect, fascists. But Trump loves dictators. He even went to North Korea. He's Hitler. Isn't that an anti-Semitic comparison? Just asking. Anyways, Putin too, and this by force association Jill Stein too, is Hitler. Everyone who doesn't agree with us is basically Hitler. But our fascist friends are never ever Hitler-like figures of fascism. Neither Netanyahu, that is anti-Semitism, right, nor the Saudi king, nor Dick Cheney, who rigged an election to get the mass murder of Iraqis for the creation of an incredible amount of personal wealth. But when Trump is Hitler, the worst of all thinkable president, then you should be very happy with the horrible alternative the Dems are, and even grateful for them. Even if you are a homeless black trans person who on average only gets 35 years old, you should know it would be worse under Trump. So be grateful and vote for us. Also, be grateful that only 300,000 Palestinians are genocided and 2 million are displaced. It could be 2,000,001. Because electing Trump will immediately and definitely lead to the creation of a Nazi Germany like USA, to an apocalypse, instead of to a mere continuation of the ever-escalating fascistization, also caused by Biden and Harris and other Democrats. This kind of irrational fear-mongering is based on and exploits irrational authoritarian fears, or German angst. And it works with implicit or explicit threats that are A, supposed to somehow affect you, and B, are directly directed at you. What I mean by this is that A, it's somehow apocalyptic for you as a privileged person. No, it's not. And your pretextual marginalized neighbors to have a second Trump presidency. And this is B, articulated as an appeal to force, fantasizing about you being brutalized if you don't comply with the Dems. I hope you get raped on a Trump. Less violent, but similarly emotionalizing and irrationalizing, is the appeal to pity instead of to force. As a black woman, Harris really had to fight hard to get where she is today. Well, that doesn't make her any more empathetic or any less genocidal. But think of all the trans people or women who need abortions under Trump. Apart from Harris shitting on trans people by not overruling red state into trans laws, this too doesn't make it any more justifiable to vote for someone who's committed the crime of the crime, genocide. Someone who's committed to kill people for profits, to escalate a system that is ever more deadly for all marginalized people. And besides, would you really accept the fake argument? Just think of all the queer Palestinians under Hamas. Well, I know an Iranian woman, a fascist monarchist of the elite, who wants us to liberate bomb Iranian women. Liberate them from life with their death call. We should do that for them only, of course. That we profit of all that is an unfortunate or deserved incident only. Nothing systemic. I also know a Palestinian, personally for sure, who's going to vote for Harris. Meanwhile, outside all the supremacist fairy tale world, most Muslims in swing states are going to vote for Jill Stein, as polls have shown. And if everyone emphasized with Palestinians as much as they do, we'd have Jill Stein elected. However, in a systemically authoritarian, settler colonial fascist state, which has always been inherently genocidal, most people value their own comfort over life for all. Just like scapegoating non-submissive Palestinians for supposedly electing Hitler today, submissive Palestinians can be instrumentalized as an excuse for the liberals' own guilt. It's also just anecdotal evidence when Dems try to change your mind by telling a singular story of a particularly negatively affected woman who needed an abortion in a red state. What's left out, dysystemized, is that Democrats had 50, respectively 20 years in power to codify Roe v. Wade, yet they decided to rather run the election campaigns on this issue, which is authoritarianly instrumentalizing and exploiting people's fears and needs, than actually do that. They put party over lives at home, just like they put profits over lives in Gaza. Apparently because they don't have anything else to run on to offer you, which is significantly different from Republican offers. In other words, they are responsible for this particular woman's fate too. Like anecdotal evidence, episodic framing only appears to be factual. However, the story lacks systemic context. It's desystemized. Here too, it's often the most marginalized and most negatively affected by our system who are instrumentalized. In the case of episodic framing, the story isn't told by the politicians, which might feel a little bit distant, but seemingly by the woman herself. Perfidiously, we appear to listen to her own voice. However, there will only be small, decontextualized and desystemized excerpts of her story, unconnected to our system and the Democrats' guilt. The perfidity lies in the fact that she's really speaking here, that we believe we hear her own story, her whole story, disconnected from our system, which is causing and explaining her experiences of violence. But when this explanation is lacking, the audience will fill this void with the conceptualizations they have ready in their minds. They fit the sentences into their own frameworks. In a systemically authoritarian and sexist and so on society, these are authoritarian and sexist and so on. So, as research has shown, instead of learning to understand these women and empathize with her, they tend to start to question the women's behavior. In other words, we have a kind of storytelling which is sensationalizing and emotionalizing, the opposite of empathizing, in the short term, but which will later lead to indifference due to a lack of systemic understanding. As a result, we won't see the need for systemic change, but also we see such cases as individual tragedies, which are attributable to the other fascists, the red states. Speaking of instrumentalizing, desystemizing, appropriating, and reframing own voices of the systemically marginalized, we come to tokenism, which usually comes in the form of a member of a marginalized group who chooses to speak, more or less explicitly, on behalf of a collective identity in a way which fits into the frameworks of and pleases the dominant society. I, as a black woman, have made it. Why can't you? What's wrong with you? This dominant society, which wants system justification at all cost because it profits off of this system, happily falls for confirmation bias. It searches for information which confirms the privileged and ignorant worldview and dismisses information which contradicts it. It searches for singular tokens who confirm them so that they can dismiss millions of Palestinians on the question of who to vote for. This amount of irrationality, by the way, equals that of conspiracy thinking, which not only massively overestimates the relevance of whichever singular premise you want to have confirmed, and massively underestimates dimensions and systemicity, but also massively overestimates the logical validity of arguments and of sources of your in-group. And mainstream media will happily help them to exploit their confirmation bias and will even corroborate it with exploiting another characteristic bias in systemically authoritarian societies, authority bias. They invite so-called experts who, again, merely repeat the worldview of the two major parties, because if they didn't, they weren't allowed expert status, careers, and contacts to politicians necessary for their jobs. These are experts within, made by, and for our system. Our system is produced and given expert status and extreme privilege so that they have every reason to defend this system. Pollers who frame polls in biased ways, which disadvantage third parties, politic guys who reiterate party frames, journalists who present the perspective of a media outlet's billionaire owner, police officers, military generals, and anonymous intelligence sources, all products of our system's institutions, as well as many, many people who are on the side of the Democrats and Republicans. All these above-average privileged people tell you why it doesn't make sense to vote against the system which has made them part of the top 10% and you part of the bottom 60% who cannot even afford an emergency bill of $500 or $400. Yet we believe them to be experts for us, paternalistically. And then there are lovely people like Eminem, the known misogynist and queer hater, who will certainly know best which party to vote for protecting marginalized people. Beyoncé, who pretends to simply be there as a mother, just like you, not invited as an almost billionaire with undemocratic, gigantic wealth and reach, and Taylor Swift, another billionaire. And if you are aware that a system which produces billionaires who can buy reach and influence cannot be democratic, you probably also sense that their workers produced the wealth they robbed. They will surely want the best for all overexploited workers, and they will surely use the platform to promote a party which would end this injustice, right? Parties exploit your uncritical affection towards such music, TV, and sports stars, and none of them will ever question the system which creates such gigantic successes, superstars, and hierarchies, which give individual people a degree of credibility and reach which no single individual should have in a society based on equality, equal chances, and equal say, like in a democracy. And even worse, in our necroliberal society, we falsely attribute moral and intellectual superiority to those who are able to make it through our amoral system to the top, instead of questioning these people the most. As a result, we falsely trust stars, top politicians, experts, and billionaires, our system's profiteers more, to improve our existing system when it comes to judgments about what is good for the rest of us and the planet, than ourselves and the most negatively affected by our system, who know best which change we need. Unsurprisingly, in our supposedly meritocratic society, research has frequently shown that we, when undecided on election day, rather vote for the party which is polled to be the likely winner. In our necroliberal society, we want and we need to be associated with winning, not losing. And as mentioned earlier, we also see singular political seats gained immediately and directly by a Democrat escalator of the system as better than building a real systemic alternative over time. Similarly, we fully trust people more who are supported by our system because they support our necroliberal system, just because they are labeled by the system's institutions as accomplished. Way too many people still trust those responsible for this impoverishing system more than those who fought their whole lives against this system, but are labeled as irrational, emotional, aggressive, or even terroristic and losers, simply because our system logically prevents them from becoming successful. Never trust the system's experts. Never trust your neighbor in a mansion more than yourself. And also never trust the person you'd love to see yourself in more than the person you really are. Way more likely to lose everything tomorrow and become disabled than making $1 million in a couple of years. And you also shouldn't trust your boomer parents in these issues if they don't understand how much they were privileged when our necroliberal system still had to compete with the more social communist system of the Eastern Bloc and grant your previous generations huge breadcrumbs in order to make them submit to it, despite there being a more cooperative and social alternative. Or do you have a house the same age as your parents had one? How much more student loan debt do you have than your parents? Which seems to be the opposite to an appeal to accomplishment, expertise, and celebrity is actually the same. An appeal to common belief also relies on the system's wisdom, the knowledge our far-right system produces. But just because a huge majority, 95% of Israelis, believe the genocide is good, or not intensive enough, according to a general poll, it doesn't mean they are right. And just because a similarly high number of US Americans seem to be okay with affirming genociders like Harris and the Dems on election day, not fully understanding the systemic ramifications of such a vote, of normalizing sacrificing millions of people for profit maximization, and normalizing all these dehumanizations and false narratives justifying murder, it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. Let me briefly digress to a common form of circular reasoning here. Greens can't win, so I won't vote for them, which serve the artificial self-exoneration of voting for genocide. So the question is, why do you want to be on the winner's side instead of on the morally right side? Sounds pretty fascist to me too. And it's the result of the false equation of winning a majority and being right, which is also connected to the irrational appeal to law I mentioned in an earlier episode. What the majority has decided to become law and legal is falsely equated to be morally right. Appeal to tradition, like our legal system, the Constitution, the Founding Fathers, supposedly non-criminal former presidents, Obama or a whitewashed MLK, or the electoral system itself, or we've always done it that way. There's no other way to do it. Don't make it right either. And you probably won't find people arguing with fake concessions like, I also don't like how the system works, but ever working on changing this system. And just because a system, including its two major parties, worked well for you for decades, that doesn't mean it will in the future. Or are you as hopeful for the future and as easy with expenditures as in the 90s? All these appeals, whether to your beloved celebrity, accomplished expert, anonymous source, rely on you trusting them. But just because you believe them to be right with a specific judgments in the past, that doesn't mean that they are right in this historic moment of time when billions of people watch a live-streamed genocide. Don't underestimate the effects of that. Don't underestimate how the world, especially Muslim countries, and the billions of the global south in general, will react to the US in the future if they see you voting for genocide, voting for their death over cheaper grocery prices now. And don't believe you'll always be able to just silence them, bond them into silence and submissions. On a lighter note, just because you trusted your dad forever and on everything, that doesn't mean he's right on third-party voting, or Palestine, or student protests. The appeal to common belief I mentioned a minute ago or so is not to be confused with an appeal to common folk, which politicians use all the time to manipulate you. My dear fellow Americans, just like so many of you, I grew up in a working class district. Sure, I had professors as parents, and I've been quite rich for decades now. But I put on my $4,000 pants one leg at a time, just like you common people. So believe me when I say, this genocide is good for all. It will redistribute billions from the taxpayers to the rich, so that they might abstain from raising your grocery prices. And yes, it's still the best system of all times, the best system thinkable within the extremely narrow Overton window we've created for you. So vote for it. Look, I was a local council member and worked in politics for many years, so trust me, I know what I'm talking about. Never ever trust a liberal or electoral politics. Everyone knows what that leads to. If I had really left it to that and didn't explain my reasoning, you might have trusted me due to my appeals to experience and expertise, although it lacked arguments that obviously wouldn't have been rational. That is what all these appeals to emotion, this mode of language aims at, irrationalizing you and gaining your trust baselessly, just on grounds of vibes and aesthetics or identity, over logical arguments and systemic understanding. Just like some of the more overly authoritarian rhetorical strategies I'll discuss in the next episode, such rather subtle appeals are basically deflective fallacies of irrelevance. It's precisely due to their subtleness that they are preferably used, unless authoritarians are either irrationally panicking or feeling impunity. Which is exactly why you should never give impunity to authoritarians by voting for them.